So there's a parchment that is found, which is a supposedly the original source of this sort of trial that went on with the Knights Templar.
The chinon parchment.
Yeah, that's what it was, the chinon parchment.
I think that's a forgery.
Some weird stuff in there, man. They were saying that like during the initiations, like the Templars, they had to denounce Jesus and then make out with each other.
Yeah, I think that was a later forgery. And the reason why I say that is because Napoleon had actually raided the Vatican archives on his campaign, his Egypt campaign. Actually, he stopped it in Italy to Rome. He raided the Vatican archives. He brought everything back to Paris. He was specifically looking for Templar documents, and he never found that document.
Why was he looking for Templar documents?
So, Napoleon was the illegitimate grandson of Bonnie Prince Charlie, who was the Scottish king in exile.
Okay.
And who was a Templar. And so he had an interest in Templarism because of that. I mean, that's not like widely known, but he was Bonnie Prince Charlie's illegitimate grandson, which is why his name Bonaparte just means basically of good blood. And he always said he was royalty, but he never presented anything to back it up. And this is also why he married a Merovingian princess, Princess Josephine. The Merovingians, of course, was the royal line of France. And there was some speculation that they were passing on an Atlantean tradition, of which Jesus and Mary Magdalene had been a part of, and their bloodline had been a part of. And that, so Napoleon wanted to be married into that. Add that to the fact that Napoleon's personal physician was Bernard Raymond Fabre Palaprat, who was the Grand Master of the Templar Order at the time.
Wow.
And he had encouraged Napoleon to go find these artifacts and to trace down this root information. So when Napoleon went to the Vatican and raided the archives, I mean, he set up a whole series of scholars specifically to look for Templar artifacts, and they never found the chinon parchment.
So he had a whole like army of people that were going through all the archives.
Yep. Yeah, they brought him back to Saint Sulpice in France, in Paris, and in fact, one of the people who was in charge of that was
what year was this? Roughly.
Oh, I
can you find it?
I don't know.
Is this
off the top of my head,
like not like information that you can find on the internet?
Yeah,
When did Napoleon invade?
You should be able to find it. One of the people that he had going through those archives was actually Alfonso Constance, better known as Eliphas Levi, who was a priest in Paris, who was known for writing very esoteric things, including a book on transcendental magic. And he was later in Freemasonry. Albert Pike, who was considered really the philosophical father of the Scottish rite of Freemasonry, when he wrote his book Morals and Dogma, 80% of that book is word for word copied from Eliphas Levi, which is kind of interesting. But this was the fact that they were going through these archives. They were finding all kinds of stuff on the Templars, and they never found the chinon parchment. And it wasn't until after Dan Brown's books came out,
Yeah.
that all of a sudden the church released this new document that they'd found that had just happened to be in their archives for the last 700 years without them noticing it. It was a little weird, but it seems to suggest that the chinon parchment is probably a forgery.
So you think it was just there to destroy the credibility and make the Templars look like sickos?
Well, what it did is it
I mean, back then they probably wouldn't have been that.
The big thing about the chinon parchment is it suggested that that the church wasn't behind the persecutions. Basically, it gave the impression that the church had pardoned the Templars, and that
the chinon did
the chinon parchment, yeah, and then Philip the Fair persecuted them anyways and burnt them at the stake anyways.
Right.
So, but it allows the church to wash their hands of it and say, well, we pardoned the Templars. Because, see, here's this document that just showed up that says we did,
Yeah, there was like stuff in there saying they had to denounce Jesus, they had to spit on a cross,
right?
And then they had to abstain from any intercourse with women. Yeah, none of that's real.
No, and then there was obscene kisses on the buttocks.
Yeah, they kiss their butts and their navels, and kiss each other on the mouth.
There are initiation. I will tell you, there are initiation rites within the Templar order.
This is the kind of shit you got to do at FSU when you're like being like hazed.
Yeah, right. I mean, in our degrees, there are some things that are similar to that, but it's not. It's highly distorted. No. Like there's a kiss on the back of the neck, and you'll find this in Sufi traditions as well. And it's this area, the back of the neck, was associated with Doth on the Kabbalistic tree, and it was this area is there's a ganglia here in the spinal column where the nerves go to both the pineal gland or the third eye and to the radial nerve, in which goes to these two fingers and the thumb. This is why you always see Jesus doing this, right? And it's designed to awaken that area in the person. There's also things where
why do you think they said they had to denounce Jesus?
The theory is that they were preparing them for if they got caught by Muslims during the Crusades, where they would be tortured, and they would have to do those things in order to survive. That's the mundane theory behind it. I don't think there was ever a denouncing of Jesus, but there was a denouncing of the cross, because according to Templar documents that were found and in the tradition, there was a belief that Jesus actually survived the crucifixion, and that it's abhorrent to worship the cross, this implement of torture, right?
Right.
And that
makes sense.
What we should really be worshiping is they saw Jesus as a brother, and they saw him as a exemplar. And this is the big difference between what Templars have taught versus what the church has taught. Templars have always taught that Jesus was the great exemplar, not that he was the great savior.
So they didn't view him as like a divine.
No, they saw him as divine, but no more divine than any of us, and that we all have the ability to do the things that Jesus did. In fact, even Jesus said that. He said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, these miracles you see me perform, ye shall do also, and those even greater than these." Right? So he's saying anybody has the power to do these things through the universal consciousness, through the Christos. So Templars viewed Jesus as when Jesus spoke as the Christ, he was speaking as the universal consciousness. And that anybody has the ability to access that universal consciousness and have that universal consciousness work through them and be able to do the same things Jesus did.
Right.
But it takes a certain amount of devotion and understanding and internal work, before you could get there.
Right.
But Templars views Jesus as an exemplar. Like he was showing us the way of how we can be. And the only salvation comes from us personally attaining that gnosis, that divine knowledge. Because once you attain that knowledge, you really know who you are, you know where you came from, you know where you're going, and you understand the bigger order of things. So you know there is no death, right?
Wow.
Which is a profound statement, And the Templars performed initiation rites, and they still do, that are designed to help you understand that who you are is not just your physical body, and that there's a part of you that survives your physical body. There's a part of you that can live outside of your physical body, and that you have this whole other side to yourself that largely remains dormant in people till they're able to wake up.
Yeah.
So
there was something I was reading this morning. Steve, I sent you a link to this this passage, or it was a write-up. It was called The Questions of Mary. Are you familiar with this? The Questions of Mary?
No, but I know Mary.
It's one of those links I text you.
Mary's another, that's a common Egyptian name that you find.
Yeah. Oh, this is it. The Lost Greater Questions of Mary. Can you zoom in on this a little bit? Yeah, this is crazy. So it says, this is Bart Ehrman's podcast, or not podcast, his website. There's a blog article on there where he's writing about this thing that happened with Jesus and Mary. He said one of the great questions for scholars is whether such book ever really did exist, and it's mentioned only once in ancient literature in a highly charged polemical context by Epiphanius of Salamis, a Christian heresy hunter who was prone to exaggeration and fabrication, who was incautious at best in his attacks against heretical sects in his book, The Panarion, Medicine Chest. In it, Epiphanius supplies the antidotes for the snake bites of heresy. Wait, is this the one I said? Go scroll down. There was, keep going. Okay, here we go. For the Gnostic Philibonites, this text and their corresponding rituals related to their doctrinal views that humans represent divine sparks entrapped in human bodies which need to escape. Human procreation perpetuates the state of entrapment by providing an endless supply of bodies as prisons for the sparks of the divine. The solution to the problem, then, was to engage in non-procreative sex as shown to Mary Magdalene by the Savior himself. One odd night on a mountaintop, and here's the quotation for the text from Epiphanius. The first sentence, obviously, is Epiphanius himself explaining what the book is, which is called, okay, so the book is called The Greater Questions of Mary. They indicate that Jesus gave a revelation to Mary, taking her to the mountain as he prayed, and then extracted a woman from his side and began having sexual intercourse with her. Then he gathered his semen in his hand, explaining that this is what we must do in order to live. When Mary became disturbed and fell on the ground, he again raised her and said to her, "Why do you doubt, you of little faith?"
Wow.
Somehow I think this one never had much of a chance of getting into the New Testament.
Yeah. Well,
He was kind of a perv, man.
Yeah, there were a lot of Gnostic and apocryphal texts, that suggest all kinds of interesting things with Jesus and Mary and others. I mean, some people believe. I happen to be under the opinion that, and Timothy Freak covers this quite well in his books, The Jesus Mysteries, and also Jesus and the Goddess. I think
Timothy Freak.
Yeah, Timothy Freak and Peter Gandy. They did a number of good books. But one of the hypotheses is related to the Apostle Paul, that Paul, for the most part, he has these writings where he's speaking like a Gnostic, like he experiences Christ as a vision of light on the road to Damascus, right? Which is a very Gnostic thing. And it said he was taken up to the third heaven. Well, most people are like, know what heaven is, but what's the third heaven? And we know that Damascus was actually a code word used by the Essenes for their base in Qumran. And so it may suggest that Paul was an Essene, and that the third heaven, there were 3 levels of initiation or baptism that was designed to cleanse the person of all the bad stuff that they had attached to them as they incarnated into this world. So there's a baptism by water, there's a baptism by air, and then a baptism by fire. And we find this going way back into the ancient world. I mean, going back to Noah's Ark, in the story of Noah's Ark, grafted onto that story, you have the earth obsessed with its physical senses. Along comes a flood, water. Then Noah lets birds go into the air, and then he lands on Mount Ararat, makes a burnt sacrifice to God, fire, right? So those are the 3 stages of purification, if you will, which is done in the alchemical process, and it's but it was also used in the baptismal rites and the initiation rites in the ancient world. So, but with Paul, so the third heaven would be that he had gone through those 3 different purifications, right? Well, along comes a bishop known as Irenaeus, who wrote a book called Against the Heresies, much later, where he was trying to condemn Gnosticism. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, at the same time, they discovered these new letters of Paul, where Paul is condemning Gnosticism. And the suggestion is that the church, in particular Irenaeus, created these letters of Paul specifically to justify suppressing Gnosticism, which was a rival perspective of Christianity than what the Roman Church was setting up at the time. And hence why Paul seems like this.
Paul's gospel was the closest one to Christ.
Well, it's supposedly Paul never actually knew Jesus, right, when he was alive,
right,
and yet the entire canon of the Roman Church was largely based off of Paul.
What was the closest gospel to Jesus? The first one published, or the first gospel?
Well, they say it's Matthew. They don't
okay.
really know for sure. I mean, there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the standard gospels, and you have some of them are kind of similar, and then you have John, which is like totally out there and somewhat Gnostic in itself.
Yeah.
But
the closest one I thought was like 20 years after he died.
Well, yeah. I mean, they have found fragments, the Nag Hammadi fragments and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And all of these texts seem to point to source texts that, were within 100 years of after Jesus supposedly lived. but we don't know for sure. I mean, it's a guess.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's speculating.
Yeah.
And
There's a bunch of. I had a guy in here who's been studying the Dead Sea Scroll fragments his whole life, and apparently there's a huge like black market for people trying to buy the fragments, and a ton of them are fake. And he actually discovered a bunch of the fakes.
I believe it. There's also been some that they haven't released them all. You know, the ones that they found, they kind of gradually release them. And part of that's because, and every once in a while they get leaked. And as they come out, part of the reason why they don't release them is because they contradict modern theology. I mean,
Right.
There's some great astrological information on some of them, for example,
Right. Another thing, and then they were mostly in Hebrew. I think if there was a very small percentage of them that were in Greek,
right,
and maybe some Aramaic. And the interesting thing about the Hebrew, like going back to what we were talking about with the Septuagint being the original written in Greek,
right,
is that there was so much more Greek literature around in the Library of Alexandria. Like everywhere was Greek. There's literally, I mean, we had the Dead Sea Scrolls during that time period that's in Hebrew.
Right.
There's nothing else in Hebrew.
Right.
That's it.
Right. That's it. That's right. And then the Nag Hammadi, some of those texts, I mean, they have some New Testament types of fragments, but they also have Hermetic texts, writings of Hermes that were right in there with them too, which suggests that this sect that was preserving this stuff they saw them as compatible. And that's a whole nother can of worms that no one likes to talk about, but the Hermetic texts were.
How so? Why don't people like to talk about it? I think I'm missing something here.
Because Hermeticism was a pagan form of Gnosticism.
Oh, okay.
And it was centered around Hermes, the Greek god Hermes.
Yeah.
And
what was the deal with Hermes again?
Well, Hermes was, he was he was deemed to be the inventor of the word. He created language. He was the messenger amongst the gods. He was he did a lot of work associated with talismans, how to bring energies from the stars down into and capture them in talismans here on planet. He was the inventor of alchemy. And he was, in some ways, the Hermetic texts could be read in almost a Neoplatonic way, suggesting that all reality. One of the things that the Hermetic texts say is that all reality that we're perceiving is just mind stuff. It's the mind of the Creator. Like we're living in the mind of the Creator, and this matrix that we're in is in the mind of the Creator, and it seems solid and real to us, but just as the Creator's thoughts can change, so can matter change.
Those Greeks were bombed on drugs, dude.
Yeah, but it's right in line with what people like Maxwell Planck and Schrodinger and the other physicists of the early 20th century were saying too.
Totally.
This is all made up of mind stuff.
No, yeah, you're right about that.
So it's just the Greeks the Hermeticists were saying it thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I mean, what else could be responsible for the architecture of something like Notre Dame? I mean, that is just astonishing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
The patterns, the symmetry,
and the symbology that's in it too. I mean, most people don't realize that there's depictions of the Bible all throughout it, but there's also astrological information in there. There's sacred geometry in there.
Can you pull up images of Notre Dame, Steve?
There's alchemical imagery in there. The alchemical, in fact, the front doors of Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris, if you go to the very front doors, there's these medallions that are right at head level as you're going in the doors, surrounding the doors. And those medallions actually,
Look at that shit, man.
they actually depict every stage of the alchemical process because they were trying to preserve that information.
Go to the interior image on the left. Jesus.
Yeah,
man.
incredible, right? And it's designed all acoustically too. So like, a priest could be at the front shouting out whatever, and it'll just echo through the whole building, so people can hear it. I mean,
What wasn't this building rebuilt though after World War II?
Well, it's just rebuilt recently. In fact,
recently, right?
It's opening, I think, this week.
Yeah, what happened to it again? It burned down?
Yeah, it caught on fire. I think it was. That's another thing. I think. Don't want to talk about conspiracies. I think the church set it on fire.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Because they're looking for artifacts, and the only way they could do the archaeological digging in there is to have the place closed down for a while.
Really?
And it's interesting.
They need an excuse.
Yeah, there's a number of cathedrals that were all set on fire around the same time, including St. Sulpice, but the same hour that Notre Dame of Paris was set on fire, the former headquarters at King Solomon's stables in Jerusalem, where the Templar order had their headquarters, was also set on fire.
Really?
Same hour. That's a weird coincidence. I think the church is
What do you
looking
think
for
they're
artifacts.
trying to find? What kind of artifacts?
They're looking for things that they think might be buried in the church that the Templar order may have left there. Those cathedrals, the cathedrals of Notre Dame, and it's not just Notre Dame of Paris, but it's all the other cathedrals in the area, including Chartres Cathedral and others. If you view them from the air, they're laid out in the constellation of Virgo.
Really?
Yeah, so they mimic the constellation of Virgo in the heavens on the ground. And, of course, Virgo was the Virgin, right? Just like Notre Dame was Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, right? But most people don't think about so each one of those cathedrals are built like a human body in form. And the Templars did this. They learned of this in Egypt. They were studying the temples in Egypt. You go to Karnak and Luxor, for example. It's all built out like a human body in form. And
How so? How like a human body?
well, like if you view it from the air, the Luxor in particular, the whole thing is built like each part of it is like a human body in form. In fact, there's Schwaller de Lubitz, who was he's the one who first proposed that the Sphinx was
You
much
type in
older.
aerial view, Steve.
Yeah, aerial, or look up, type in Temple of Man by de Lubitz. You'll see a depiction of Luxor, and you'll see the human body imposed over it. Yeah, so it's all built so that like the bottom part is where the feet are, and the top part is where the head is.
Oh yeah, it kind of does look like that, doesn't
Right.
it?
Exactly. So the Templars, they started figuring this out. So when they built the Notre Dame Cathedral, Our Lady, it's built like a human body in form. So like the baptismal font's at the area of the belly button, the choir speaks from the area of the lungs, the priest is at the area of the heart, and then the sacrament is kept at the area of the third eye and the head.
The sacrament?
Yeah, that's where the wine and the wafers are kept, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, for communion. So, but then as you leave the church, you go through the arch, which is the birth canal. So if Notre Dame is Our Lady, which is Mary, the Virgin Mary, and you're being born from it, what does that make you? Makes you the Christ.
Wow.
Right? Totally Gnostic idea, right? Totally heretical. But that's how the Templars set it up. And even Vatican City, if you look at Vatican City from the air, it's built like a human body in form too. In fact, I have a good picture of that.
Have you ever been to the Vatican?
Yeah. But you know, the cathedrals were built to be these human bodies in form too. You know, specifically because it has that symbolic meaning of the as above, so below. But
What's the story with the Holy Grail?
oh, yeah, that's a good question. So originally the word grail comes from ancient Sumer, and it was graal, Gra.al. And what it alluded to, that was the word for the alchemical science in ancient Egypt.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, here he is. Yes, on the right there you can see Vatican City.
Oh, kinda.
See the legs and the belly and the going up into the head. Yeah.
So okay, I see what you're saying now with the pregnant belly in the middle.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So all of these ancient these temples were built with this as above, so below relationship between the person and the structure itself, and it had symbolic meaning as you went through the temple. You know, there are different things at the different part of it that corresponded to different parts of the human body itself. And,
interesting.
yeah, but you find the same thing with the cathedrals. Hence why they're called Our Lady, Notredam.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I mean, even Aristotle claimed that Plato was a known liar.
Right. Sure.
So, you know, I feel like to take that into context of when he's talking about this war between Athens and Atlantis, you can't just throw that out, right? You gotta consider the fact that he was known for creating these lies and these hypothetical
or metaphors,
these philosophical ideas, right?
Sure.
Thought experiments.
But on the other hand, he said he received his information about Atlantis from Solon, who was his grandfather. And he says that Solon learned of it from the high priests in Egypt.
Right.
And we actually know where the Atlantis story is recorded in Egypt. It's at Edfu, at the Temple of Horus at Edfu, where it's laid out in the temple walls. It's the building texts at Edfu. And they talk about this great civilization where the gods came from, and that it had collapsed from they depicted as a giant serpent in the sky that came down and destroyed it, and that they escaped on boats and they fled to Egypt, and then they started setting up Egypt to be a repository of the Atlantean information.
So, do you know the do you know the chain of transmission for the Atlantis story? Like, if we take Plato got it from Socrates, right?
No, Plato got it from his grandfather.
Plato got it from his grandfather? I thought he got it from Socrates.
No, Solon.
Oh, okay.
He got it from Solon, his grandfather.
So Solon was Plato's grandfather?
Correct, yeah. And he got and then he got it from the priests in Egypt.
And then Solon, so how, from the time Plato wrote it down, how many years was it before Solon told it to him?
Well, I don't know, probably maybe 20 or so. I mean, it wasn't that long. But what's interesting is Plato does place the fall of Atlantis 9,000 years before him, which would have put it exactly.
That was before Athens was even there.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So he said Atlantis existed 9,000 years before, and it had collapsed 9,000 years before him.
Yeah.
So, and that would have put it in Plato's time, that would have put it exactly at the time of the Younger Dryas.
I have this thing. I have it saved somewhere. Let me pull this up because this will be, I think, informative for us to look at. I screenshotted this a while back. I have the, and you can probably confirm how accurate this is. It is basically the chain of transmission of the Atlantis story.
Cool. What's interesting...
It's just hard to remember it.
What's interesting is one of the things that Plato talks about with Atlantis is he says that the colors of Atlantis were black, red, and white.
Mm-hmm.
And those were also the colors of Egypt, which is why Egypt's flag is black, red, and white.
Interesting.
And those are also the colors of the alchemical process of the transmutations. They go through the changes from black to red to white as you're working them in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And those are also the colors of the Templar order. That's why the Templar flag was black and white with a red cross on it. And some people have said to me, well, so from a Templar perspective, the Templar order was really founded to seek out. They understood that there were all these flood stories, right, from all these different cultures that they are encountering. They all had these flood stories.
Yeah.
And they understood that they originally were looking at it from a Noah perspective, like that there had been this civilization that had collapsed from the flood.
Right.
But when they encountered the Druze and the Sabaeans and others who were translating the works of Plato, they came to learn of the Atlantis story. And so they determined that this great civilization of antiquity was probably Atlantis, and that they were trying to find the remnants of Atlantis. They're trying to find the technologies, the philosophies, and the knowledge of Atlantis to rebuild civilization.
Oh.
And that's really what the Templars were doing. Now some have said to me, well, that's just something that you're making up, Tim. But in fact, it's something that's been in our tradition a long time. I first learned of it through the Grand Master before me was a man by the name of Raymond Bernard. And he wrote a book called Secret Meeting in Rome. And this was about his initiation in the Templar order in, I think it was 1956. And in his description of his initiation in the Templar order, he learned about the Templar connection with Atlantis. And he writes about that in his book, Secret Meeting in Rome. So that's where I first learned of it.
And how did he learn about it?
From the Templar Grand Master who was initiating him at the time. Yeah. So
this is the chain of transmission that I'm aware of for the Atlantis story. Okay, so destruction of Atlantis 9,000 years before Solon, right? And this is in the Critias.
Right, correct.
So 9,000 years before Solon is apparently when it was destructed. So from 9,000 years ago, there's an oral history of it for 1,000 years, never written down. Then it is allegedly written down by the Egyptians 8,000 years ago, or 8,000 years before Solon, right? So it's talked about for 1,000 years, only oral, finally written down 1,000 years later. This is in Timaeus.
Right.
And then, but we still don't have any writings of this, right?
But there is actually. It's at the Temple of Horus at Edfu.
Okay.
It's on the temple walls.
Okay.
For the building text there.
Okay. So then the priest reads the records,
right,
which is 1,000 years, or which is how long after? So the priest reads the records, years pass, and then he tells his memory of the records to Solon without consulting the records. Solon tells his relative Drapides. Drapides tells his son Critias the Elder. At age 90, Critias the Elder tells it to his 10-year-old grandson, Critias the Younger. Then Critias the Younger tells it to Socrates. Then 50 years later, Plato writes it down.
Right.
Which is wild. So apparently, okay, so you're saying that it's written down by the Egyptians. Okay, this is saying it's written down allegedly by the Egyptians 8,000 years before Solon, right? After this destruction of Atlantis. And this is in the Edfu texts.
Yeah, so what happened was they had it written down on these parchments that they were passing down for centuries, and then at somewhere along the line decided we better get this like on a temple wall so it's preserved.
And when was that written? When were those Edfu texts written? Do we know?
I'd have to look at when the temple of Horus was built at Edfu.
Okay.
We'd have to look up when the temple of Horus at Edfu was built.
Can we look up when the temple of Horus at Edfu was built? And it was written in the walls?
Yeah, they inscribed it on the temple walls so that it would be preserved. And so you can still see it there to this day. Where it's what's known as the building text, and it was when they learned how to build in ancient Egypt.
Okay,
and it was from this episode of the gods,
200 BC.
So that's when they incorporated it on the walls.
That says when it was built.
Right. When they incorporated it on the walls there.
So they
but it came from these earlier texts, and then they started incorporating.
But we don't have the text.
We don't have the text.
Right.
No, they've crumbled.
We don't. Have it. So like what the point that thing was making.
There's legends that there's a hall of records underneath the Sphinx.
Yes, I've heard that.
Where all this stuff is preserved.
Yeah.
But,
so just looking at this,
yeah,
it's like, I mean, how serious can we take it when you have this, 1,000 years oral history? Then it's like this game of telephone through millennia.
Sure.
And then you have Plato writing it down. He's not a very good.
Well, and I would concede that Plato, he would write things in metaphor.
Yeah.
I mean, he would take. I once was given some good advice that says you need to learn to read. Sometimes you need to read history as myth and myth as history. You have to look at it both ways.
Yeah,
because sometimes there's things that are contained in the. It's like. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things that are passed down in nursery rhymes or in, stories that could just get changed slightly throughout history. But if you take it back to its source, there's some real truth to it. Mm-hmm. And, as far as Atlantis goes, I think part of it was metaphor, for sure. But I think part of it was there's probably something to it.
Maybe.
I mean, the fact that he places the collapse of Atlantis 9,000 years previously
before
to him,
Solon,
which would have put it exactly at the Younger Dryas cataclysm. Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
That's spot on.
That is true.
And that's I think we have to consider that. So,
yeah, we can. Yeah, I think so too. But like.
Now, where Atlantis was,
we got a wobbly table still.
Yeah, for sure. I don't believe Atlantis was like an island somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I think Randall believes it was in the Azores.
Yeah, Randall believes it's in the Azores. There's some Templar traditions that suggest that too. In fact, that's the whole reason why Portugal owns the Azores, right? Because Portugal was founded as a Templar state, right? Exactly. And it was Portugal was founded as a Templar state, and they acquired the Azores. And there's some tradition to say Mount Pico in the Azores was actually the top of a very large mountain where the Atlanteans worshipped. That's just one tradition, though. I mean, I think that if there was an Atlantis, it was more of a worldwide network culture.
Yeah,
more of a worldwide empire, like the British Empire. I mean, you would find if if civilization collapsed right as the British Empire was at its peak, you'd find English all over the world, and there would be a debate about where this empire base was, I mean, and I think it was a similar type of deal.
I think Atlantis, if it was real, it's probably still there, and that's where all these UFOs are flying around. They're all coming from Atlantis. It's like this underwater base that they're all going to. Maybe it's run by AI. I don't know. Maybe it's just like still super advanced
under the water.
Yeah,
quite possibly.
I mean, we've explored more of the moon than we have of the oceans. It's there's a lot we don't know about the ocean. We've explored like what? I think it's like 5% of our ocean floors.
Well, the other thing you have to keep in mind, too, is, the Mayans and the Nahuatl cultures of the Americas, they have the same myth of Atlantis, but they call it Aztlan.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that you have Aztlan of the indigenous Maya and Nahuatl cultures called it Aztlan. Plato called it Atlantis. It's pretty much the same word,
And then who took it after Plato? Was it Ignatius Donnelly? Was he the first one to take the ball and run with it after Plato?
Well, he wrote the most authoritative work on it early on, I would say. Donnelly was known for two things. He wrote on Atlantis, and he wrote on the idea that Francis Bacon wrote the Shakespeare plays. Those were the two things he focused on. So, but Donnelly definitely picked it up pretty big, and then then people have been running with it ever since.
Yeah.
And Donnelly also believed that it was in the middle of the Atlantic. Other people have suggested it may have been in Antarctica, before it iced over. Some people have even suggested it was the planet Mars, and that there were beings coming over from Mars, and that's the reason why it was described as red, black, and white, because those are the colors of Mars.
Whoa. And
that Mars is about the same size of what Plato was suggesting. I mean, that's a whole nother thing getting out there, but there's different theories on it. I will say that in Egypt there's also an island called Elephantine Island in the middle of the Nile, and it has a number of things there that shouldn't be there. I mean, first of all, it looks like a bomb went off on the island. I mean, there's huge, 700-ton structures that have just been blown to the side. There's granite, or not granite. I can't think of it, but there's stone buildings that have been blown apart into literally like pieces. And there's speculation that there's an ark that's there to this day. I mean, there's German scientists who've been digging there for decades now, trying to get to it. But really? But there's other things that they found on the island, including boomerangs, which or they call them magic throwing sticks, which seem to connect some sort of connection between the Egyptians and Australia. And there's also a temple of Tutmosis III on the island, and in the temple they have depicted Mayans meeting with Egyptians.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, very clear.
How can you tell they're Mayans?
Because they have big Mayan headdresses, and they're dressed the same way the Mayans dress.
Really?
And they're trading beads with the Egyptians, and the hieroglyphs talk about the two, that they were brothers on either side of the big body of water.
Wow.
But that suggests that the Egyptians were probably trying to go find, in antiquity, people that they were connected to previously, And the fact that both have the same Atlantis myth.
They both built pyramids.
It suggests that there may be some connection there in antiquity. And the fact that the Mayans have, and not only that, but the Mayans, not only they have the same Atlantis myth, which they just call Aztlan. They say they escaped Aztlan in boats, and fled to the Yucatan where they are now. But they refer to the people of Aztlan as the Itza, which just means like water wizard. So they referred to them as water wizards.
Yeah.
But the fact that they have this whole myth, same myth as Plato talks about, is bizarre. And I'll tell you, even at the if you go to Nacomul, which is the second tallest pyramid in the Mayan world, it's in the Yucatan in Mexico.
What's it called again?
Nacomul.
Nacomul?
Yeah. It's on the very top of the pyramid there are tridents. And I think that the Mayan also had this figure known as the falling god figure. But his body is in the shape of a trident. And of course the trident was the symbol of Poseidon, who was the god of Atlantis. So there it is. There it is.
That's the second biggest pyramid?
Yeah, second tallest pyramid in the Mayan world. Yeah, and at the very top of it, you can't see it, but there's like a little structure on the very top, but on that structure is these trident shapes, right?
Type in tridents after the word, Steve. Go back, type in trident.
Yeah, you probably won't.
No, you won't have it on there.
No, no one's allowed up there.
Oh, okay.
I've got some photos of them at one point in time.
Wow, man, you've been everywhere.
Yeah.
You're a world traveler.
But
the general consensus from Egyptologists about the pyramid being a tomb is pretty astonishing.
It's ridiculous.
But even more ridiculous is the idea that the Serapium, boxes, were coffins for like bulls or horses.
No, that's ridiculous. There was the reason why they say that is they found a bull sacrifice by the later Egyptians that was mummified and placed outside the Serapium. You have to remember when the Egyptians found the Serapium, because they found it, right? And they were blown away by it, right?
How could you not be?
Those
boxes are too big to even move through those hallways.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
They fill up the entire hallway, and those things weigh like 1,000 tons each.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you get those in there?
How do you get them down there? How do you move them? How do you get the lids off?
Right.
How do you and they're dendrite. They are the hardest granite that there is, and the Egyptians had copper tools. They couldn't have made those.
Right.
There's no way.
Copper and
they're so precise. They're so precise that so when the Egyptians found it, they tried to preserve the site. It was what they did. They did everything they could to try to preserve it. They would go and they would worship there. They would even eat the dirt. You can see the areas around it where they dug out the dirt to eat because they thought it had magical qualities. But
there's photos of Chris Dunn inside those boxes with a square tool, like holding the square tool to the corners.
Totally precise.
Totally perfectly square inside.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the outsides aren't as perfect.
Right. Yeah, and you tell me how you even drill out the inside of that box. You'd need a diamond drill, and then it would have to be so precise. So I'm under the opinion. Now, there's different people that have different opinions about what those boxes were for. I think those boxes were, they were like a survival shelter. It's where they kept.
Yeah, look at that shit, dude.
Yeah, exactly. So precise.
Jesus
You
Christ.
can almost see the reflection in the stone. It's so you can see the reflection in the
It's
stone.
literally reflecting him. It's so polished.
It's so polished. And, we would be hard pressed to be able to do that today.
And it looks like the carvings on the outside. It looks, if you look at the precision of the work they did on those boxes and how much engineering and knowledge and skill had to go into creating those, and then you look at the carvings, the Egyptian carvings that are on the outside. It's like graffiti. It looks like toddlers came along with crayons afterwards and tried to draw on the outsides of these masterpieces.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, they're unbelievable. We go down there for sure and explore them and look at the areas where you can see, where there's still remnants of the hydrofluoric acid that I'm sure was used to help create it. Mm-hmm. To help carve them. But I think it's my opinion that these were a pre-cataclysm technology that was created to store grains and other things for after the cataclysm.
You think that's what this was for?
Yeah, it absolutely.
But then why would it have to be so precise just to store grains?
I think they just had the technology to do it. They wanted.
You think it was so easy for them?
It was easy for them. Yeah, it was easy for them, and they had to make them so heavy to ensure that they survived the cataclysm, right? I mean, you have to remember if we're talking about the Younger Dryas, and I believe that there was shall we say, probably comet fragments that were hitting the Earth at that time.
Do you think it was the Younger Dryas or maybe before the Younger Dryas?
Well, the civilization was pre-Younger Dryas.
Pre-Younger Dryas, right.
But then the Younger Dryas cataclysm is what they were trying to preserve everything from.
Right, because with the Younger Dryas cataclysm, would that have impacted Egypt that much? Because that basically wiped out all the megafauna on North America, right? It hit the North American ice sheet.
I think it hit the entire north. I think it was hitting in northern Europe too.
Because Africa, all the giant animals and the giant megafauna they all survived, but there's nothing like that in the U.S.
Correct. In fact, and I'll tell you something else that I believe, and I say when I say it's me, but it's also the Templar tradition has passed on. Is the belief that the Valley of the Kings is, most people think of them as just these tombs that are built out of the side of the mountain, right? Which is true, but all of those tombs are actually connected by tunnels that go way down into the earth. And I believe that area was originally those were originally survival bunkers from the cataclysm, and that later they came out of that, and the pharaohs preserved the memory of originally coming out of there. And so, because all of that stuff, I mean, those tunnels, it would have taken thousands of people to carve all of that out.
Right.
And if you're trying to keep a place a secret, that'd be pretty dumb, right? To employ thousands of people to carve this whole place out, because it's not going to remain a secret.
Yeah.
I think it already existed. And what the secret was is the pharaohs passed on the memory of it. And so they went back there and started burying themselves there to hide, because they're trying to be buried close to where their ancestors first came out of there after the cataclysm. And the reason why I believe this is because in many of the tombs to this day, they still have depictions of things that they shouldn't have known about. There are Egyptian tombs, and I can pull up pictures of this for you too, that show bearded white dudes, these tall, giant bearded white dudes with red beards, with baby woolly mammoths on leashes and giant sloths on leashes. The Egyptians shouldn't have known about woolly mammoths or giant sloths, right?
Right.
Those were animals that existed prior to the cataclysm and went extinct after the cataclysm.
Right. After Younger Dryas.
Right. So what are they doing them, depicting them on Egyptian temple walls? And let me give you I'll give you a picture of that.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Chris Dunn's pyramid power plant theory?
Yes,
The Giza power plant?
Yep.
Super, super compelling. And the fact that he's an engineer
Yep.
and understands how these things works and build, jet engines and his whole point is that precision is the product of function, right? Precision comes from function. You don't need precision unless you're trying to achieve some sort of functional goal.
Right.
So why would all of these things be so precise in the Great Pyramid, and unless it was designed to actually do something, right?
Yep. Well, check this out. The king's coffer in the Great Pyramid. The inside dimensions of that king's coffer are the exact same dimensions as the outer dimensions as the Ark of the Covenant as described in the Bible. So if we remember that these arks are electrostatic capacitors, they were in all the temples of Egypt, right? And if you put mana in it, which was a superconductive substance, is this monoatomic elements, it produces tremendous amount of power. Well, if you're to put that in the pyramid, right, in the king's chamber, in the king's coffer in the pyramid,
Yeah.
the pyramid itself is just from the weight of the granite pressing on it is piezoelectric.
Yes, this is one of the things that Chris Dunn explained to me when he came on here. Was
Right.
he had a NASA physicist, Dr. Friedman Freund, I think his name was,
Yep.
who showed experiments of squeezing these giant granite pillars and being able, and they put an electrode on one end of it, and then they used a hydraulic press to squeeze the other end of the granite, and it created electricity.
Yep, that's right. And
the fact that the pyramids on the Giza plateau, which is a seismically active part of the earth, the idea is that the electrons from deep inside the earth, if there was an earthquake, or if his idea was that there was like a hydraulic hammer inside the subterranean chamber that would basically hammer the earth and create these mini earthquakes, that basically shot up these electrons into the pyramid, charged all of the granite and limestone in the pyramid, and that somehow combined with chemicals going in the shafts of the Queen's Chamber, then going up through, resonating through the Grand Gallery. The combination of this charged granite with all the electrons, the sound that was coming through the Grand Gallery, and the chemical combustion that was happening inside the Queen's Chamber created some sort of crazy reaction in the King's Chamber that utilized those laser or masers, those shafts that go out of the King's Chamber out, and that somehow, according to his theory, would be a way to provide a free energy for whatever civilization was there.
Yep, I think. Well, I think there might be something to that. I also think, though, it doesn't even have to be that complicated. I mean, you have right now, if you were to stand on top of the Great Pyramid with just take a wine bottle and you put a wet rag on it and hold it up, sparks will start shooting off.
What?
Yeah, just from the natural generation of the static electricity that's built up from the desert and through the pyramid. So if you were to put an arc, which is designed to literally build up static electricity with this superconductive substance right in the center of it, it's going to generate a ton of electricity to broadcast in the region. And in fact, let's look at the word pyramid itself. Pyramid literally means fire. Mid means middle. So fire in the middle. That's literally what pyramid means, right?
Wasn't there like some sort of, it looks like there's something missing from the top of it. Like there was a capstone.
Yeah, there was a capstone.
Or like a metal thing on top maybe.
Yeah, I think that there's different theories that the top capstone. So here's the pictures of see the woolly mammoth.
Oh yeah.
And the giant sloth on leashes.
What the fuck?
Yeah, and if you go to
can you zoom out a little bit on that?
Yeah,
what do the people look like?
Yeah, there's another
Okay.
there's another picture I just sent him that's the same image without my hand in it, but you
Yeah.
can see the people.
Oh wow.
See, there's these tall white dudes with red beards. This is in one of the tombs in Egypt, right in the Valley of the Kings, right? Clearly, the pharaohs never saw woolly mammoths and giant sloths. So clearly, they were trying to preserve the memory of these things from the previous time, which was known as the Zeptepi, the original time.
Yeah.
You know, so prior to the cat, and the Osirian is arguably the oldest megalithic structure in Egypt.
That place is crazy looking.
Totally crazy. And it's all fit together like jigsaw puzzle. And it's
you remember, Steve, do you remember when we had the Snake Bros on here?
Oh yeah.
And they were showing us all those cuts of the Osirian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the water, they don't know where the water is coming from. I think it's probably a natural spring or something.
Yeah,
because originally they thought it was Nile water, but it's not Nile water. And it goes down. I mean, from what you see is just at the top of water level, but the water level goes down another 40 feet.
See if you can find an image of like the corner cuts of the Osirian, like where they show like the wall joints coming together.
Yeah.
And the overlap. Like it looks as if they just stacked all these stones in a big pile and then cut through them to create the negative space.
Yep.
See if I can find
Well, and those are, you have to keep in mind that each one of those stones is almost 100 tons, I mean, the big ones.
You can't really see it there.
Yeah.
This has been ground down, and this is the original stone right there. They just
Just type in like Snake Bros Osirian, you'll find it.
Snake Bros.
So this is like basically the backyard of the Temple of Seti the First at Abydos, and then the temple was built up above it. And in that temple, that's where they had one of these arcs that the Templars found. And
really?
And that's also where those hieroglyphs
there
are.
You go.
Of the helicopter and the.
Is that it?
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't show the grind mark.
You can't see it. So like that corner piece, it would have been one stone.
Yeah, it's usually the lentils.
We're having trouble finding it right now.
Yeah, you have to look at the lentils.
What's this?
No, these were close-up photos, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm typing.
But the whole place is very mysterious. You know, I mean,
do you know the conventional explanation to how those stones are cut there?
No, they don't know. To be honest, I mean, they know it's rose granite. They know it comes from Aswan, which is
500 miles away.
Yeah, and not only that, but you have to go over a mountain range,
right,
and then back down to the Nile if you're going to transport them. There's a lot of mystery surrounding it, and it's. To this day, I mean, it's they don't know where the water's coming from. I'm assuming it's a natural spring.
Yeah.
But again, so at that level where you're seeing it, that water level, it goes down 40 feet.
Right.
Even below that, So it's a huge structure.
They gotta send scuba team down there.
Yeah.
See what's down there.
Yeah. It's I am under the opinion. This is just my conjecture, that they were taking the water from there, they're bringing it up into the temple up above, and they were doing alchemical processes in that temple. And they were extracting from it these monoatomic elements that would go into the ark, which would generate tremendous power. That's my take on it. Now, as far as cutting those stones, there is a process, and I recently revealed this to the Egyptian antiquities. There's a plant that grows near a lot of the monuments in Egypt, and its scientific name was dictypetalum. And if you do these alchemical processes to it that are taught within Freemasonry, where if you were to do that to acacia, you could extract DMT. But if you do it to this dictypetalum, what you extract is hydrofluoric acid. And hydrofluoric acid eats through granite. It melts granite. It melts
Does it really?
The silica in the granite. Yeah, and the only thing that stops that hydrofluoric acid are gold, lead, and beeswax. And so
they can't burn through gold, lead, or beeswax?
Correct. So I think, I know what they probably did with a lot of the etching on granite was they would create a beeswax, they pour beeswax over it, and then they'd cut out and create a template for what they wanted to be burned into the granite.
Interesting.
And then they just put a wash of the hydrofluoric acid on it, and it would eat away into it and etch it. I think this is also, if you go to Dendera, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, there's these staircases that appear to be melted. And there's all kinds of conjecture about how they got melted. I think it was a hydrofluoric acid spill because they were doing that etching on the walls going up the staircase. And they must have had a spill, and it just melted the stairs. Yeah.
I had this dude on here named Jeffrey Drum. He has a channel called The Land of Chem in Egypt. He lives right across the street from Giza.
Yep.
And he has this crazy, interesting. And
there's the melted stairs.
He has a super compelling hypothesis on how they used the pyramids to create chemicals. Like, he thinks there were chemical manufacturing plants.
Sure.
And he says even when you go inside one of those, I think it was a step pyramid maybe, he said it smells like sulfuric acid. Is that what it was, Steve?
It smells like ammonia.
Ammonia. That's what it was. Ammonia.
Yeah.
He says that people, the conventional explanation for it is from bat shit, but he says it doesn't make sense because for some reason it wouldn't smell like that all the way. It smells the worst the deeper you get, like to the very deepest part of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And he has the diagrams of them, and he lays it out really well on how it would have made perfect sense for those things to be manufacturing those chemicals, and they would have been used to create fertilizer, to spur the growth of agriculture and all kinds of stuff there.
I think there's something to that. They got these giant boxes down there too below the step pyramid, and they have almost like a cork on them. It's a stone cork, and you can tell they were like a pressure cooker type of deal at one point in time, so that steam could escape out. But if you tried to pull the cork out, it wouldn't. It wouldn't let you do it.
Right.
So,
and there was also these bowls, these giant bowls that are at the somewhere around that pyramid near the base. It looked like there was these channels going through the rocks, and then these big bowls that looked like they were there to hold the whatever sort of chemical or whatever sort of fluid was coming out of those pyramids.
Quite possibly. I mean, you have to remember Chem or Kemet was the ancient name for Egypt,
right?
And that's where we get alchemy from, from which, and then from there came chemistry,
right?
But it all goes back to Chem or Kemet, Egypt.
He also thinks that when in the Serapium, like there's these scoop marks that are cut out of those big granite boxes down there.
Yep.
He thinks that they would have used these chemicals potentially to soften the stone to scoop out like cracks or whatever. Because if those things were using sound or whatever to like resonate or whatever, there was like high energy in there, you wouldn't want cracks in there to fuck with the integrity of those boxes, so they would scoop it.
I think that was the hydrofluoric acid that I was talking about. Yeah, I think that's exactly what they were using, and in fact, we even find, if you go to Aswan, the quarry, where they got all the stone from, you can find the pocking from the acid in certain areas or to this day around there. And then even the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, it has those scoop marks going down the sides of it. And I think that was just where they would pour the acid down, and
under it too, right?
And under it, and then that's how they would start to shape it. And I'm sure that's what was going on. So within Freemasonry, there's the standard, what's known as the Blue Lodge, which is 3 degrees of where someone becomes a master mason. And then once they become a master mason, they can go into what's known as the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. And both of these systems have a whole nother series of degrees, but both of them culminate in Knight Templar degrees. And so I did that. I actually ended up doing both. Became a Knight Templar in the York Rite, became a 32nd degree Mason in the Scottish Rite. And then
what kind of shit do you have to do to become that high level of a Mason? Like, what do you have to learn stuff? Do you have to?
Yeah, you learn stuff. You have to memorize a bunch of stuff. You have to.
Like what?
They give you things to memorize so that that's basically like the outline of the ritual itself. And the reason is, if every Mason in the world died tomorrow and you were the last person, you could rebuild the entire system based on what you had memorized. And those degrees have within them moral instruction, but also they give you the keys for a number of things, including the science of alchemy, so you can make your own medicines.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And as well as the blueprints for rebuilding civilization should it collapse again.
What kind of medicines can you make, or do you learn to make?
Well, you learn the fundamental process of how you can take an herb, also how you can take a metal and break it down into a solution, get rid of impurities, and then turn it into something else, that's good for you, that's more potent. So, you'd go through stages of digestion, distillation, calcination, extract the oils, the salts, rebuild it all back together, and create a medicine. So you learn how to do that with the the building blocks are the same for all medicines in terms of what you start with and then how you extract this stuff at the end. But you can also, one of the herbs or one of the plants that's emphasized within Freemasonry in particular is the acacia. And if you do these processes to the acacia, you can extract certain forms of acacia. You can extract DMT out of it. So, it's one of the undercurrents to the Masonic tradition, and it was something that they had inherited from the Knights Templar as they were traveling in the Middle East. in the Holy Land and meeting with groups like the Druze and the Sabaeans and others who were passing on this alchemical tradition and who were translating alchemical texts from the Greek and Roman and Egyptian times.
Is it common practice within Freemasonry to take DMT and to do these psychedelics?
I wouldn't say it's common practice. There are brothers who do. But the process is there. I mean, the process for extracting it is the same as you would for any other herb. You know, you do through the same process. It just so happens that
So psychedelics aren't necessarily a part of that.
no, they're not necessarily part of it. There have been Masonic rites throughout history that have done that to a certain degree. I mean, I would recommend the works of P.D. Newman. He's written a number of books that specifically focus on that in particular. But yeah, so that's part of it. I mean, if I think there's a lot of subtleties in Freemasonry and the ritual that is they don't necessarily tell you directly what they're telling you, if that makes sense. You go through these initiations and they will subject you to weird things, and those weird things, they don't make rational sense.
Like what? What kind of weird things?
Well, it's just like for example, you may have a ritual where you only have one shoe on, and it's just, at first it may seem like a form of hazing, but then you realize it's actually they're trying to emphasize, your left side of your body, for example. And they're trying to, between the degrees, they're trying to bring you into balance with yourself. But they'll also talk about things that just don't make sense. Like one of my favorite ones is there's a in the third degree there's a ship captain. They do these plays for the person, for the candidate. And in the third degree there's the ship captain, and it's there's these bad people that are trying to get on this ship to go to Ethiopia from Jerusalem. And most people don't think anything of it. And it's King Solomon's ship captain, right? And it's King Solomon's ship. And these bad people can't get on King Solomon's ship that goes from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. Well, you got to remember, Freemasonry largely standardized its rituals by the early 1700s. And there is no way to sail from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, right? You couldn't sail from Jerusalem to Ethiopia until the Suez Canal was built, which was recently, right? So then you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of ship is it? And the answer is, at the same time that ritual was being developed, there was a Freemason who was also a Templar by the name of Bruce. Bruce was his name, but he was with the Scottish Royal Society, and he had just discovered this new Ethiopian text called the Kebra Nagast. And in this text, it talks about King Solomon's flying ship and how King Solomon would fly from Jerusalem to Ethiopia in this flying ship.
Who wrote this?
It's an ancient Coptic text.
What's the name of the text?
The Kebra Nagast. And it's
Kebra?
Yeah, Kebra Nagast. It's Ethiopian.
Nagast.
Yeah, it's an Ethiopian text.
Oh, here you go.
Yep. And in it talks about King Solomon's flying ship and how he would travel in a few hours, what would normally take people several days.
Can you find when was this written,
Well,
Go to Wikipedia or
It was first discovered and translated in English in the 1700s, early 1700s.
Oh.
He had done it for the Scottish Royal Society. But the text is believed to be, quite ancient and something that was preserved by the Coptic Church there. And but the fact that it talks about King Solomon's flying ship, that's really what is being emphasized in the ritual. So here's this Masonic ritual from the 1700s that is emphasizing King Solomon's flying ship that would allow you to go from Jerusalem to Ethiopia by flying. So,
Interesting.
Very interesting.
And fun.
Yeah.